Good morning, Lisa, and good morning, viewers.
Good morning. Welcome to Tennis Takeaways. I'm Lisa Stone, a tennis parent and creator of Parenting Aces.
And I'm Dewey Evans, a performance architect focusing on the mental side of performance with young people and helping their parents guide them through having the best possible experience through youth sports.
We're so happy to have y'all joining us today. And in today's show, we're going to be talking about race in tennis and the USTA's recent statement on diversity in tennis.
As our guest, we have Leslie Allen, and Leslie has had a distinguished career in tennis. Growing up playing in American Tennis Association events, she went on to be a member of the NCAA championship team at University of Southern California. She was the first African American female to win a professional tournament after Althea Gibson. She was a French Open finalist, and she had a career post tennis of being an executive with the USTA as well as a tournament director. Ran programs, still runs programs. She's a speaker. She's done so much. We're happy to have her here as our guest today. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you so much. It's my honor to be here. And my bio, that's fabulous. It wasn't the singles that I was a finalist at the French, it was the mix. So, I just want to keep it real.
Yeah, I just said a French Open finalist. I wasn't going to distinguish between one or the other, but yes.
But I just want to go to
And,
the record saying, wait, where did that happen?
and that's going to be part of the story is some things that happened during that event. During the finals of that event was part of what you spoke about recently. Can you tell me real quick, or us, where was home growing up?
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and then later moved back to Cleveland, Ohio in about the eighth grade. And then most of my adult life, I was either in Florida or New York. So there you go.
Okay. And as a young person growing up, you played in American Tennis Association events as opposed to USLTA at the time events. And why was that?
So what you need to know is growing up, I was not the tennis player in our family. My mother was, and she decided she was a school teacher so she could have her summers off and play the ATA circuit. So my entire childhood was about each week and each weekend going to the courts, and she would compete in tournaments. I would wander off to the playground or whatever and maybe come and hit a few balls. People tried to encourage me to play. I wasn't interested. They even sent me to Dr. Johnson's camp. Wasn't that interested. And between the ages of 11 and 14, I didn't hit a ball because I wasn't playing tennis.
So can you
What
tell
was
us?
that experience? Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead,
yeah.
Dewey.
Please, Lisa. Please, Lisa, jump in.
Well, I wanted to just first of all clarify that USLTA is the precursor for USTA for our viewers that don't know that. And at the time that you were coming up, there weren't very many Black athletes participating in USLTA events, if at all. So the ATA was created as a tennis circuit for those who weren't maybe welcome at USLTA events. You are not an old woman. You are a relatively young woman. This is recent history. This is not something that was happening back at the turn of the century, meaning the turn of the 20th century.
Right. Um, well, the ATA was the counterpart to the USLTA because it's one of the oldest, it is the oldest African American sports organization. It's more than 100 years old. And so for the first 70 years of the USLTA's life, segregation was mandated. Blacks were barred from playing in the tournament. Finally, Alice Marble said, "Come on now, Althea's great. You should let her see how good she can be by playing in our tournament." So my experience as a young person growing up in tennis was through the eyes of the ATA. It was very wholesome. It was very engaging. It was like family. and it was very comfortable. I would hear stories about the up and coming juniors or either adults, including my mother, that would venture to play in USLTA tournaments, and they were treated poorly. They both faced each other in the draw, their entry was lost, or there was always something. So even from a kid, even though I wasn't participating, I understood that the ATA was like family and home, and the best African American players were groomed there. And then when you ventured out to play in the quote white tournaments, yes, competition may be equal or a little better, but you should expect, just by hearing the story, sitting in the back of the car with the grown folks talking, you should expect you may not be treated with open arms. So I understood that from the start. And then when I began my tennis journey, even when I was in Cleveland, there was an African American club, Tri-City Tennis or Forest City Tennis, and I would play ATA tournaments as a teen. I wasn't winning everything, but it gave me a place to work on my game. I was fortunate as a young person, 11, 12, when before I was 11, have Bob Ryland give me the foundation. So when I came back to tennis, I knew how to hit the balls. Then now I had to add more strokes to my game and learn the strategy.
So there's a rich history that I think anybody watching would be well served in knowing. So Bob Ryland was the first black tennis pro. He was playing pro tennis long before anybody else really was. So to kind of date him, what was it, last week or the week before, he turned 100 years old. And he is still with us. I had the good fortune to interview him about, I guess 5 or 6 years ago as part of something that I was doing and introduced to him by some friends. And you also mentioned going to Dr. Johnson's camp. So before Nick Bollettieri's, there was Dr. Johnson. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of Dr. Johnson and the player development for the ATA?
Well, Dr. Johnson was the head of the player development for the ATA, and his first protege actually was Althea Gibson. And he and Dr. Eaton came to her and said, "We think we can groom you to be the player that can break the color line." So she did that 3 years after Jackie Robinson integrated baseball. So for a woman to do that in that era was pretty spectacular. And what they did, they were both doctors, physicians, and had courts at their house. So forget about having an academy with 25 courts. From this one court, they mentored Althea Gibson, and then later Arthur Ashe. And in between, up until the time of his passing, there were hundreds of young African American players that went down to his camp and his one court and developed our games. And more than developing the game, it was actually getting the information on how to navigate in the tennis world when they didn't want you. And he was very strict, and he essentially gave us the tools to cope to be able to survive in a world that didn't want you. And so if we could survive Dr. Johnson, then playing USLTA or USTA tournaments, it was not a problem. So for that, I was forever grateful. I wasn't playing a lot of tennis. I found some old letters that I'd written, and I would be complaining about, well, we didn't get a chance to play much tennis, and whoever my roommate was ate more cereal than me. So, that was my focus as a kid at the camp. I wasn't on the tournament traveling team, but hundreds of athletes, many that we've heard of in the Black community were, and it was significant.
You mentioned, Leslie, coping mechanisms that you learned at the camp. Can you give us some specifics of things that you were taught that you needed to do as a Black athlete trying to compete in an environment that didn't feel welcoming to you?
Well, I think as a person of color, you are, whether someone specifically sits you down like they do now and have the conversation with their sons / or daughters like I had with mine, when you have an interaction with the police, do this, don't do this, say this, don't move, So his was not quite as direct, but so we learned these things by osmosis. So one, you could never show any kind of outward anger within whatever was going on in the match, because there was the thought that if you lose your mind and, let's say, act McEnroe like, then the door is going to be slammed and nobody else is going to get a chance to participate. So that was one. You had to have perfect decorum, which is why Arthur was the chosen one, because there were three Arthurs at the same time, equally talented, and probably Arthur Ashe was not the most talented, but he had the right mindset to be able to navigate, the same way as Jackie Robinson was not the best baseball player, but he had the mindset to be able to deal with what he was going to be facing integrating baseball. So I remember about decorum, and I also remember about line calls. And if it was close, you had to call it in. I mean, that's not necessarily how people coach today. You know, if you don't see it, obviously you can't call it out. But it was really to stop any potential altercation that would come up. So, you know, there's
It's
a laundry
interesting.
list.
Well, I was just going to say that I think it's interesting that there was a culture across the board for black people who were trying to make the move outside of the environment where they were, that you had to have that certain decorum that you said, and you needed to be better. My mom grew up in D.C., but then went to Brown and to Harvard, and we lived in Concord, Massachusetts, where she was the only, we were the second black family there, and she was the only African American working in the school system. And me as a young person couldn't be that aggressive black male, because otherwise Concord was never going to allow other black families into town. So a lot of the same things that Dr. Johnson was presenting to those in his camp, I was going through as a young person growing up in Concord, Massachusetts, where we were trying to open doors, or my family was trying to open doors for other people. How did that affect you when, or I guess first, how did you matriculate from there to USC without having played USLTA events?
Well, you know, I agree with what you say about how you need to act in a particular environment, because it was just a given that you had to be twice as good as your white counterpart in order to get the position, get the job. And then being female, you even had to be even better, because obviously it was a sexist society that we live in. And that wasn't only something that came from Dr. Johnson, it came from just the greater black community at large. That's just the world that we lived in. And how did I get from Dr. Johnson's or to USC? Interesting route. I was in high school in Cleveland, and there were no sports for girls at this particular high school. And I desperately wanted to be an athlete of some sort, and, you know, play basketball or play volleyball or play something, but there was nothing. And I used to watch the Olympics and just lament, ooh, if I could be on a team and I could have on the uniform. I don't know why the uniform was so key in my mind, but, you know, I was a kid. So, but we did in our school have a boys tennis team. And it was an urban school. That was the one I happened to be going to at that moment. And they weren't very good, and I, in fact, was the best one, because the tennis boom was happening in the 70s. And so I was like, wait a minute. All of you all are just discovering tennis. I know tennis. Went back in my closet, found the same racket that I had when I was 11, and dug it out and started playing, and was playing some ATA tournaments. So from that, a couple of things happened. Title IX, World Team Tennis, and the start of the Women's Professional Tour. So suddenly, wait, you could play tennis and not just get a trophy, you could get a check. That's interesting. You could play tennis and go to a college and play on a college team. Oh, that's interesting. I need to think about doing that. So on my high school team, and you all will appreciate this, they told me no, you can't play in the state tournament. State tournament started, and how some things are just karma. Or I was one morning got up, and on television, my little 13-inch black and white TV, you know what those look like, right? Sitting on my dresser in my room, I'm getting ready for school, and I hear this woman who's on the local news show talking about the Women's Law Fund and this new law that had been passed recently, Title IX, that provided equal opportunity to women, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, hold on, this school I know must get federal money. So I think they're illegally barring me from playing. We called up the Women's Law Fund. I was their dream scenario. The state tournament had started. Okay, my two male counterparts on the team had played and already lost. So technically, we were out of the tournament. The tournament was maybe about to the quarters, and so the attorney said, "All right, there's going to be an injunction. You're going to have to stop the tournament if you don't let her play." So what they did was they drew a backdraw for me to play, and the person they selected for me to play was the number one seed, right? So they're like, okay, we'll let her play, but we'll give her the number one
Right.
seed.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I didn't really care. I'm going to get a chance to play. But what they didn't know is the number one seed had gone out of town to work on an art project or art studio, something or other, because his next matches were not like until the next weekend. So there was no reason for him to think, having advanced to the quarters, that he was going to have to play backwards. So they put me in, and it was not the number one player from the school. It was in fact their worst player, because everybody else was already in the draw somewhere else. And so I ended up beating that guy. And so, I lost in my subsequent match. But the point was, it was an opportunity that I had to fight for, because sometimes you have to fight for it, and people aren't always up and up, even in how they tried to stack it against me by giving me the number one player in the
Right.
whole tournament. And so from that, I'm like, well, I want to see how much better I can be. Went to Carnegie Mellon, academic scholarship, played number one on their team. I want to go to a school that combines academics and athletics. So where did I go next? Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. Why there? It was across the street. It was across the street from my tennis club, and the guy who was a tennis coach knew me. Where else did I go? Texas Southern University. They were supposed to start a women's team, so there I got in shape. And if you talk to any person of color that trained in Houston, Texas, they will talk about running the bayou. It's a thing. It's a brutal thing. So I got in shape in that way. And then I went to the ATA Nationals in San Diego between my sophomore and junior year, and decided I don't want to go back to Texas. They're not starting a women's team. I don't want to go back to Texas. So the thought was, let's find a school in California where you can go to. So literally in August, I walked onto USC's campus, and I was enrolled. My mother had my grades from all my schools in her wallet. That's what moms do, I guess. I showed it to the athletic director. They were just starting programming. And so I was at the bottom of the USC ladder, number 6. And I never really got higher than number 5 on their ladder. And I can remember sitting in Heritage Hall, where all the Heisman and all of the accolades from every athlete that's ever gone to USC was. And my teammates were all in a row filling out our bios. And they were saying things like, did you win the 18s or did I? Did you win the grass courts when you were 16? They had won so many titles they couldn't even remember. And my sheet of paper was blank. And so in that moment, I said, one day I'm going to have something to write on that paper. So played on the team for those 2 years, could equally match them. I was continuing to get better. And then when I joined the tour, of any player who's played at USC, woman singles, I've had the highest world ranking. So I always feel like that's great vindication. But it was a journey, and I continued to improve, and which was good, because some people build their game so they're successful when they're 12 or 14, but it doesn't translate to the pros. And I was lucky that I could still build. And when I was at USC, I did not play doubles because I did not come to the net. I was a staunch baseliner. But on the pro tour, in order to improve, I had to become a serve and volleyer, and I did. That's a long answer, but it's a crazy story.
No,
That's a
it's
great
awesome.
story. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah. I want to make sure, Dewey, because of our time limitations, that we get into the crux of, one of the reasons we wanted Leslie on here, besides sharing her history in the sport, is this recent article that you wrote, Leslie, in response to USTA's statement on diversity, in response to what's going on currently in our society here in America. Can you tell us why you felt driven to write a response to USTA's statement? What was it that bothered you enough to light that fire?
What bothered me was their third sentence when they said that the USTA has a long history of equal opportunity and making things easy for anyone to play tennis, something to that effect. So it was really the words long history of, because if 50% of your history you've been a segregationist, you can't, I felt like you couldn't say that. But more than that, you can say tennis integrated, but what was more significant for me was the opportunity for the organization to say, it took a white woman, Alice Marble, to write a letter to the USLTA officials and say, you need to let Althea Gibson play. So that was an open forum. It would be like sending out a tweet today, which shamed them into letting her play. But in letting her play, we got Althea, great champion, who begot inspired Billie Jean, and Arthur followed in her footsteps. And then you have Venus, Serena, me, Zena, to Coco and Frances. And why is that? Because of Alice Marble. So I just felt like tennis could have made a really bold statement about, because black people have been trying, the ATA had been trying for years to get Althea to play in Forest Hills or in events, but she would not get invited. It took a white person to say, you need to open up the door and let her play. So in the same moment, as we look at what's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement, all of the things that I wrote about in that article about microaggressions and racist things that have happened, any black person is going to say, yep, that happened, yes, that happened, that happened. But the difference is now white people are realizing, wow, that's happening to you guys? Yeah, it is. And we need you to have action. Don't feel sorry for me. Don't apologize for not knowing. Let's talk about what are you and me, what are we going to do to make changes? So that was really the thing. I mean, I was so angry I left my house, I had to go on a 4-mile walk. I'm like, I'm going to walk until I'm not angry.
There have certainly been people who have attacked you for speaking out. I know in one part you talk about some things that happened to you during the finals of the French Open mixed, and there have been those that have kind of come out and said, absolutely no way, that didn't happen. You're fabricating this. You're trying to smear the name of good people. What did you feel? Because while you didn't name names, it's pretty easy to go figure out who was the male player you were playing against in the French Open mixed doubles final.
Well, my intent was, as I wrote, was to write in a way that people could see themselves in those situations or see similar. And whether it was a corporate person that had worked at that organization or another, most of what I've gotten has been, yes, you told your truth is my truth. People that got tripped up by, well, did this happen or did that happen, or you seem bitter, or do you want us to cower to you? They missed the point. My point was really simple. In order to make change, we need the help of white people, period. So it really doesn't matter about a particular incident. That's not the thing. It's a chance for people to look inward maybe and see, is there something that I can do? Can I do more? We all have biases. I mean, so much of the work that I do now with athletes in terms of Win for Life and getting them prepared, I let them know you can have the best reputation, you can present your best self, have impeccable life skills, but if you're a person of color, somebody still might ask you, can you give me your badge? But they didn't ask the other people that walked by, So it was really for people to understand we live as people of color in two worlds and have to navigate. You've had the luxury of living in your bubble and not known that has been happening. So, whether it was an incident in the French Open or in Vermont in a tournament, that's ancillary stuff. Mm-hmm. That was just to give an example of my personal experiences. But it's not unlike probably what's happened to you, Dewey. You could just line up 10 black people and they'd all have some sort of story. And it's not that we want extra credit for it. It's not that we want your sympathy. Just know we're navigating two worlds. And so, every time we walk the door.
Yeah. One of the things I would and Dewey and I have talked about this, that we really want this show to be about is giving people action items. So, as the white person on the show this week, one of the
Wait,
things
hold on.
I'm
You're
trying.
white? You're white? Dewey, you didn't tell me that.
Well, she's Jewish.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
yeah, I've got that going for me, and female. So, I mean, put me in some boxes.
Okay. 2 out of 3, that's not bad.
Yeah, but one of the things I'm struggling with, and Dewey and I have kind of been joking about this, but it's not really a joke. I am struggling with what is it that I can do to create more comfort and true diversity in our sport. And I recognize that my experience coming up in tennis is very different from your experience or Dewey's experience. But I grew up in the South, so I saw a lot of the things that my black counterparts, and let me just say, I had very few in the tennis world growing up.
Mm-hmm.
But I saw things they went through, and even as my son was coming up through tennis, his black counterparts and the things they were dealing with. So to me, I, I'm disgusted by the fact that black people feel that their situation can't be fixed unless white people step up. That makes me really, like, makes my stomach churn, because
What
I
is
feel like everybody
it?
should, well, I feel like people should be able to take ownership of their experience and shouldn't have to rely on the people putting the limits in place. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
get that as a white person, I need to change the way I'm looking at the world, and but it makes me sick that a black person would feel like their situation can't be improved unless a white person steps in and takes action. And so one of the things I'm trying to reconcile is, how do I, as a white person, work with my fellow humans who come from the black community, the brown community, the Asian community, whatever, and lift everybody up together, work together to lift everybody up, as opposed to me doing something to fix your situation. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but I think that's just the reality of the world we live in. If you go back to slavery days, there was nothing that a slave could do to free themselves, pretty much. It took the
Mm-hmm.
abolitionists, which were called white people, to make the difference. And that's just
Mm-hmm.
how American society is built, unfortunately. And yeah, people are going to make strides without the help of the majority. But whenever the majority weighs in, things shift much more quickly. The oppressed usually cannot supersede the oppressor. The oppressor has to change the behavior. So, as a person of color, I am going to do my best all the time because that's how I was raised. I don't have the luxury or the privilege of sometimes getting a second chance or giving a pass. Oh, she didn't really mean that, or oh, she was young, or there's so much coded language that goes in and around people of color, or when a white person does something, they're protesting. If it's a black person, they're rioting. I could go on forever, but I think for you or anyone, if you start to look at things through a different lens, and then be willing to say something, because what you'll find is you may have to check your friends. You
Mm-hmm.
like, that's not really a
I'm
positive
already
thing to
finding
say.
that. Yeah.
And it's going to make them uncomfortable. And I've had people come to me say, "Oh, I'm a 45-year-old coach. I'm a white guy. What do I say to my team about race?" Well, the first thing I say, one, it's not my job to educate you about race. I'm happy to have a
Mm-hmm.
conversation with it, but you need to educate yourself first so we can have a more detailed conversation. It's not an easy fix. It's not a one conversation. Okay, I got it. Thank you. Now I know what to say to black people and what not to say. You have to really understand. In anything you do, you have to research. You have to know what you need to say. And I use it as an example with my athletes in Win for Life about being prepared. when they meet me at an event, just the short version is I never have the announcer give my bio. And the first question I ask the athletes is, who am I don't know. Are you a school teacher? Do you work here? Are you a coach? And then they get around to, do you play tennis? Then I fast forward to, whenever you walk into a room, whenever you're going to engage with somebody, you should know as much as you can about whatever the topic is at hand, who the person is, what their background is, blah, 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 blah. So the fact that you don't know about an African American person, or you don't know that I'm a tennis player, one, if you only had one question to ask me, and that was, do I play tennis? If you had done your research, you might ask, what was it like to play on the biggest stage in your sport? Much more detailed, much more nuanced, much more information, because the answer to do I play tennis is yes. So when a person, not a person of color, says, what should I say? I want to make sure that you know why people feel that way, what the baggage is that people of color carry, how we successfully navigate without, basically nobody talks about this. We talk about it among ourselves, but we definitely don't talk about it with white people, but we are beginning to have that conversation. So I say, once you know a little bit more, then I will help you. But just don't act as if you're privileged and say, excuse me, but could you tell me everything I need to know so I can tell my kids? Because if it's really important to you, you will do the research and you will know, and you can ask more informed questions. So when people say, well, all lives matter, then it's easy for you to explain, we never said all lives don't matter, but this is why it's important to address the fact that we need to understand that Black lives matter too. So that would be, I don't know if that's helpful, but you have to be able to speak up or speak out. And, I assess what I do and say all the time now to make sure that my biases aren't coming up too much.
Well, and I
Do you
think
think
that's
we
part of what's happening, right? Is all of us are becoming more aware, hopefully, of
Mm-hmm.
what's coming out of our mouths, our body language, those biases that are just part of who we are,
Mm-hmm.
but trying to educate ourselves and be better.
have we
Dewey, go
pushed
ahead.
some
Sorry.
of this under the rug, Leslie? That Althea kind of cracked the door, and I've heard you say that she cracked the door. You opened it a little wider. Zena and Mal opened it even further. Venus and Serena kind of smashed it open, and that we believe in a lot of cases that the doors are now wide open, and so we ourselves have become negligent in having these conversations with people and recognizing that the struggle is still a struggle, and that we need to have the conversations among ourselves of where things are, because I find that there's a lot of aggression of black people against black people, right? So we've all had different experiences. I've had a very different one than someone who grew up in right across the street from Sportsman's Tennis Club where I worked, right? So growing up in Concord was privileged. Across the street from Sportsman's is tough. And we don't necessarily understand each other because some of us have made it, so to speak, and we've moved out, and maybe we not even recognizing the experiences of people who look just like us, and we need to find ways to connect back to that community. I'm somewhat at a loss. Our guest next week is Bob Davis, and Bob talks a lot about the Metropolitan Tennis Club and the things with the ATA when he was young, and
Right.
that we've lost a lot of that within the black community, and how can we get that
It's
back?
interesting. Well, I think that all of the conversation is helpful because we, in essence, have raised a generation of young people that they've had a black president, you've had black celebrities, so they sort of think racial issues aren't coming up, but then all of a sudden they face something and then they realize, oh, this is still here. I think everybody speaking to one another is better, and sometimes I think the world looks at a person of color through one lens, but we are diverse in our experiences as we are in our coloring. And, whether or not you have 29 degrees after your name or, you're homeless. it doesn't really matter. The first thing that someone sees when they see you is that you are a person of color. So whatever issues people of color have, it doesn't, your degrees don't matter, you know, in that moment. I mean, yes, you've been able to navigate in life and everything. So I think that's important. And I think when you don't teach young people, for instance, one of the trainings that I did with the athletes, they were, it was like a rainbow coalition just by happen. These are about 14, 13-year-old boys. Those Hispanic guy, black guy, Asian guy, Southeast Indian guy. So it was everything, a Jewish guy. So I said, for your ethnicity or for your race, what are some of the stereotypes you hear? And so they went everything from I'm cheap, I play basketball, I eat beans and rice, I'm a good speller. And just in that conversation, as we sat there, they realized, oh, something happens to you like it happens to me, like it happens to him. And so then we talked about in the training, well, how do you respond to it? How does that make you feel? And much of what I say is, I'm not telling you not to feel that way, but there are certain ways you have to respond in order to get to where you're trying to get to. And so it was really kind of eye-opening. And my favorite moment was a little Indian boy who said, like an Asian guy said, they told me to go down the street, not to the tennis club, but go down the street because they're having the whatever, you know, some academic conference down the street. So that's where they assumed he was. The black kid said they always think I'm playing basketball. So the little Indian guy said, I'm a horrible speller. Everybody thinks I can spell. And we all just fell out, you know, because we knew where that was coming from. So when you're able to have conversations about tough subjects early on, then you develop coping skills and you become comfortable. You know, I heard somebody that I've known since they were 14 refer to people of color as the blacks. I'm like, come on, really? You can do better than that. And they were on television when they said it. So that was a little bit frightening.
So how can tennis facilitate some of those conversations that you were just talking about? What is it that tennis can do to help people understand that there's commonalities as well as differences, and all of it makes the world better?
You know what I find? Because in tennis, you're in your own little isolated bubble. And even if you go with your squad from your team, you know, you're still in isolated bubbles. You don't have that chance to interact. So in the programming that I do, I mean, I did a training and one athlete said she's been homeschooled and we were all sitting in a room working on projects together with team people and challenges. And she said, this is so much fun. This is the first time I've been in a room with other students working on something. And we were probably writing thank you notes or something to that effect. But I think if you develop within your respective programs things that athletes have to interact with one another, then the hierarchy isn't just based on forehands and backhands and serves. So for me and what we do, I feel like I don't really care how you serve. I don't really care about your forehand. When you come off the court, what can you do and how do you navigate and how impactful are you? And sometimes the lesser ranked player does better. And it's always interesting to watch that top player look at that and like, wait a minute, you're getting all this credibility and all this pub. I'm the man or I'm the one. So that's a lot of how I structure it, by forcing athletes to get out of their comfort zone, you know, with support. You know, I'm not going to have them do anything crazy, you know, go from there. So because it's so insular, and it's all about me, and sometimes parents want it so much that that's a problem. And I always encourage parents to let your kids do some of the things that you do. One, they'll appreciate what you do more, and two, they'll be gaining a skill, so when you're not there, they'll be able to do it. So that's kind of how I think of this tennis, because right now, when a person of color shows up at a tennis tournament, based on responses I got from my piece, it's still not as inviting as it could be. Better, but not as inviting. So you need to make sure your kids know that on both sides.
We have work to do.
Yeah,
we do.
You know, everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Leslie, thank you so much. And Dewey, I'm going to let you talk about where we're headed next week.
And can I just say one quick thing? Because
Sure.
Sure.
yeah, so we've been doing some training virtually with athletes. So if parents are really interested and think that we can provide some services to help their athletes navigate whether they're trying to, have speak to college coaches. It's all about creating them so they can present their best selves. I have a Facebook group, Win for Life Now, and that's the 4 is the number 4, Win for Life Now, and we talk about a lot of that stuff within there and see how we can help one another.
Good. We'll make sure that we put that in the show notes and comments and places where people can find it. And thank you. That was actually going to be the next thing out of my mouth was where could people find out more information about the things that you're involved in at the moment?
Yeah, that's the main thing. And we have a website, and it's been an interesting journey to work with the athletes virtually. And one said her biggest fear about going to college was she going to be good enough. And I said, you are enough. Your family has prepared you. Your coaches have prepared you. You may have to work a little bit harder, but you are enough. And she burst into tears. So I was like, this is why I do what I do.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for all that you've done, Leslie. And you certainly opened lots of doors. The daughter of my mentor, Ernie Peterson, Jewel, attended USC, and you were certainly the color breaker in that one. So thank you.
So I've known Jewel since she was 8. When she was relentless. I did a clinic, and she kept saying, "Coach, will you hit with me?" And I realized this is a special kid. She's not going to stop. So from the time she was 8 through USC and beyond, we are still connected. And that's the beauty of tennis. It connects you forever.
Yes. Yes.
It does. And we're going to bring in next week another one of those connections, gentleman by the name of Bob Davis. And Bob was a member of the ATA back, well, he's a little bit older than Leslie, so back before she was there, an ATA national champion. He was also the executive director, program director for the Ashe Bollettieri Cities program, which morphed into the Arthur Ashe Safe Passage Foundation. He's still involved with Nick Bollettieri down in Florida. He actually co-wrote Nick's biography with him recently. And I mentioned Ernie Peterson. Bob is the other mentor that I've had in my life for tennis, so I'm excited to bring him in to the discussion next week. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And to our viewers, thank you all so much for tuning in. If you want to get in touch with us, you can reach out to me, Lisa at parentingaces.com, or Duey Evans at gmail.com. We would love to hear from you about your thoughts on our show and any ideas you have for future topics. So we're here for you. Please reach out to us, and we will see everybody next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. I'll be coming from California again next week. And wear your mask.
Yes.
Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah, and Leslie, if you can hold on while we close out the show, I'd love to talk to you off camera for just a couple seconds, but we'll see you next week.